The San Diego Padres were born in 1969, when they joined Major League Baseball as one of 4 new expansion teams. Since then, they've played 54 seasons, made 7 playoff appearances, and won 2 pennants. We'll start by looking at the second of these, if only to get it over with. See, despite winning a franchise record 98 games in 1998, thanks to stars like Tony Gwynn and Trevor Hoffman, the Padres were swept 4-0 by the Yankees in the World Series. It was a crushing blow to a club that had seemingly just caught a glimpse of the light at the end of the tunnel, only to have it snuffed out. Prior to that moment, the only other World Series appearance for the Friars had come in 1984. This was a season that had seen manager Dick Williams lead his club to their first winning record in 6 years, thanks to breakout performances from a young Gwynn and Kevin McReynolds, not to mention a walk-off home run from Steve Garvey in Game 4 of the NLCS. San Diego had taken home their first National League title in their 16-year history. Look, I'm not going to get your hopes up with this one either. Even though the Padres had taken the NL West by double digits in the regular season, they were no match for Detroit, who tore apart their bullpen over the course of the 5-game series. But this isn't going to be a sad story, because if you'll notice, I said they played 5 games, which means that in 1984, the San Diego Padres took home what remains their only World Series game win ever. Of course, there's a lot that had to happen to get them there, but one thing's for certain, none of it would have been possible without the man who, by all traditional metrics, and most advanced ones for that matter, was one of the worst hitters in the league. I'm talking, of course, about Dirty Kurt Bevacqua.
Bevacqua, huh? Is that any relation to former Texas Rangers third baseman Kurt Bevacqua?
Kurt's my husband, by marriage.
Kurt Bevacqua was originally signed by the Cincinnati Reds, who picked him in the 12th round of the 1967 draft. From the beginning, it was clear that nobody expected very much of Kurt. He was almost immediately slated into a utility role, filling in at second, third, short, and both corner outfield spots for Cleveland, who had traded for him in 1971. Even though he batted just .204 over 55 games in his rookie year, he earned the nickname Dirty Kurt for the fact that he routinely had the dirtiest uniform on the team. Bevacqua spent most of 1972 in the Pacific Coast League, hitting .313 with 72 runs batted in through the end of the minor league season. He was called back up by the club, but hit just .114 over 19 games in September. He was traded to the Royals after the season. He drove in a career-high 40 runs as third baseman Paul Schall's backup in 1973, but he was traded to Pittsburgh after the season anyway. After a short time with the Pirates, during which he posted an OPS plus of, -12, Kurt was sent back to Kansas City midway through the 1974 season in order to make room for prospect Art Howe. He was acquired by Milwaukee the next spring as insurance for Brewer starter Don Money, who had been experiencing chronic arm pain. The highlight of 1975 for Kurt has to be his championship title. His Joel Garagiola Bazooka Bubblegum Blowing Contest championship title, that is. As the American League representative, he beat out the NL's Johnny Oates with an 18.5-inch bubble on the last day. As for his technique, don't blow air into the bubble, breathe into the gum. Fascinating. In 1976, it was announced that Major League Baseball was looking to expand. Although he was still employed by the Milwaukee Brewers organization, Kurt openly admitted to the press that he was looking forward to the chance to join a new club. He got his wish that October, when he became the 4th ever player in Seattle Mariners history. By the time spring training came around, however, Kurt's spot on the roster was looking much less secure. He would be competing for the shortstop spot, and eventually lost the role to Craig Reynolds despite a .467 spring training batting average. Bevacqua would never play a game for Seattle. He'd been told by the club that he was a bad influence on younger players, and that he cursed too much on the bench. Furious over this, Kurt briefly considered moving to Japan to play ball. He decided against this though, instead signing a $10,000 contract with the Rangers the day after opening day. He spent half of the '77 season in AAA, but exploded in 1978 with a career-high 6 home runs. This impressive display of power aside though, Texas sent Bevacqua to San Diego for Oscar Gamble and Dave Roberts that offseason. Accompanying him would be former Rookie of the Year Mike Hargrove, who did not take the move well. Now 32 years old, and in his 9th professional season, Kurt Bevacqua had been part of 6 different teams, been traded 5 times, and batted a robust .231 over nearly 500 games. He'd never truly had a home, but San Diego was actually looking promising. He had a personal best 297 at-bats in 1979. It was the closest he would ever get to being a regular player. The last place Padres were in rebuilding mode though, so Kurt was sent back to the Pirates halfway through 1980. Bevacqua's second stint in Pittsburgh went just about as well as his first, and he was released after getting just 70 at-bats over a season and a half. This might have been a low point for Curt, had he not been the single most self-confident player in the league. On the outside, he was a light-hitting utility man. On the inside, he was Ted Williams. Each time he was cut or traded, which happened a lot, he somehow found a way to convince himself that the club would be the one answering for their insult. And each time, somehow, he was right. He came back to hit a home run against every single team that had ever traded him in his career, save one, the Texas Rangers, who had traded him out of the American League for good. By 1982, the Padres, having traded a young Ozzie Smith to St. Louis in exchange for All-Star Gary Templeton and Gold Glove winner Sixto Lizcanzo, were back in a position to compete again, and they wanted Dirty Curt back in the fold. They offered him a contract that spring, and on April 2nd, Curt rejoined San Diego, where he would spend the rest of his career. He played every defensive position for the Padres save center, short, and catcher, but his true value was probably found outside of the box score. He was the one responsible for sneaking a live snake into Steve Garvey's shoe in the spring of 1983, later calling it his way of helping the uptight Dodger become a laid-back Padre. He once caught 5 baseballs dropped from San Diego's Imperial Bank Tower, a 400-foot distance, by teammate Terry Kennedy. "I'll do anything for charity," he was later quoted, "or to get my name in the paper." In his first year back with the Padres, Curt found himself on one end of a verbal feud with LA manager Tommy Lasorda. In a late June game between the clubs, Dodgers pitcher Tom Niedenfuer gave up a home run to lead off the ninth, only to hit Joe Lefevre with the very next pitch. Niedenfuer was handed a $500 fine for the intentional hit, but Curt was of the opinion that, quote, "they ought to find that fat little Italian too." He ordered it. Tommy Lasorda didn't appreciate this comment, to say the least.
Tell you what I think about it. I think that is very, very bad for that man to make an accusation like that. That is terrible. I have never, ever, since I've managed, ever told a pitcher to throw at anybody, nor will I ever. And if I ever did, I certainly wouldn't make him throw at a 130 hitter like Lefebvre or Bevacqua, who couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat. And I guarantee you this, when I pitched, and I was going to pitch against a team that had guys on it like Bevacqua, I sent a limousine to get the to make sure he was in the mother lineup, because I kicked that any day in a week. He's a mother big mouth, I'll tell you that.
For 3 years, Curt Bevacqua had played a consistent utility role for a steadily improving Padres team, which by 1984 was all in on a roster led by Gwynn, Garvey, and Goose Gossage. After finishing dead last in the NL West just 3 years earlier, San Diego won their first pennant in franchise history in 1984 after a 5-game championship series win over Chicago. Tony Gwynn, who at just 24 years old led Major League Baseball with a .351 average and 213 hits, came in 3rd place in that season's NL MVP vote. Curt's season highlight, meanwhile, came on August 12, 1984. Umpire John McSherry called it the worst thing he'd ever witnessed in baseball. On the very first pitch of a game in Atlanta, Brave starter Pascual Perez nailed Alan Wiggins in the ribs. Padres righty Ed Whitson, for his part, was not happy about this. He responded with an inside fastball against Perez in the 2nd inning. He followed that up with another inside pitch in the 4th, sparking the first in a series of altercations that would see both managers, both replacement managers, 4 pitchers, and 5 position players ejected from the game. Following the 4th, or 5th, depending on how you count, fight of the game, Bevacqua, who wasn't even in the lineup that day, finally got his chance to shine. As he prowled the visitors' dugout of Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, a full can of beer sailed past his head. Enraged, Bevacqua barreled into the stands after the fan, forcing security to restrain him. This spat aside, though, the 1984 Padres were the most successful team in the franchise's history up to that point. They'd made their first ever World Series, which by itself would probably be enough to please most of the fan base. But they weren't done just yet. The 1984 Fall Classic would be the 81st in the league's history, and the first overseen by new commissioner Peter Ueberroth. It was also the last World Series until 2022, in which the designated hitter was used for games in the NL team's park. That last part is going to be the most important. After going the entire season without one, Padres manager Dick Williams was now faced with a choice of who to slide in at DH. Now, Williams is a Hall of Fame manager. Up to this point in time, he had delivered a trio of pennants as skipper of the Red Sox and the Athletics, and he'd previously ushered Oakland to back-to-back World Series titles. Even so, more than a few people were confused when Williams unveiled his lineup before Game 1, a lineup which featured none other than Dirty Kurt Bevacqua, bringing up the 9-hole at DH. Bevacqua, who had started just 8 games all season for the Padres, was maybe the unlikeliest candidate to see penciled in that day's lineup. Kurt, of course, took it in stride. He came out of the gate swinging, sending a long fly ball into deep left center, only to have it run down by left fielder Larry Herndon. By the time he came up to bat in the 7th, the Padres were down a run with just 3 innings to go. Jack Morris, Detroit's Game 1 starter, was rolling along, and Kurt was well aware that this might be his last best chance to start something. He sent a 2-strike offering for Morris down the right field line for what looked to be the beginning of a rally, and with superstars like Tony Gwynn and Steve Garvey batting behind him, Kurt pulled into second base with an easy leadoff double. Wait, where are you going? Look, I can't fault him for being aggressive. The Padres hadn't strung together more than 2 hits since the first inning, and had he not stumbled slightly rounding second, maybe he even would have made it. But maybes don't win ball games, and the Tigers took Game 1 3-2. Game 2 picked up right where the previous one had left off, with Detroit quickly jumping out to yet another 3-2 lead. After Padres starter Ed Whitson was pulled just 2/3 of an inning into the game, many fans were ready to throw in the towel then and there. But not Kurt. In the bottom of the 5th inning, with Greg Nettles and Terry Kennedy occupying first and second, Kurt Bevacqua stepped into the box against righty Dan Petry. At 25 years old, not only was Petry already one of the best pitchers in the league, he was more than a full decade younger than the 37-year-old Bevacqua. Petry takes a quick glance back at Nettles before delivering his second pitch, a middle hanging curveball. You couldn't have scripted it any better.
High fly ball into left field. Back goes Jones, away back. It's gone.
In an instant, Bevacqua became an icon. He was booked on talk shows where they asked him what he was thinking about as he circled the bases that night. "I was thinking about circling them again," he said. When someone brought him the home run ball after the game, all he could do was stare at it. "Look, it's crushed on one side," he wondered aloud. For once in his life, Kurt said, he was in the right place at the right time. Game 2 of the 1984 Fall Classic remains, to this day, the San Diego Padres' lone World Series win. Kurt would finish with a .412 average and 2 home runs during the 1984 World Series, a stunning level of production for a player who'd hit a mere 200 over 80 at-bats in the regular season. For Bevacqua, this adoration from fans and the media alike was simply the rest of the world finally catching on to the player he had always believed himself to be. For the first time in his professional career, he had an agent, a man named Go-Go Gilbert who drove a Rolls-Royce and sold insurance to celebrities. He bought a Corvette fitted with the license plate KB Hits. He even started taking acting lessons, developing an impression of Dick Williams which was so convincing that he once exchanged lineup cards before a game dressed as the manager. Kurt Bevacqua returned for one more year in a Padres uniform before retiring. At a glance, his career numbers aren't much to look at. If you look even closer, you might even call them downright ugly. But dig deep enough, and you'll find that Bevacqua was one of the most clutch hitters in the game. As a career pinch hitter, Kurt made a living off of coming into games at the moment where the pressure was highest. And he was good at it too. His .333 batting average as a pinch hitter from 82 to 84 was 100 points higher than his overall rate. He hit .346 off the bench in 1982, then blew away the NL competition with a .412 pinch hitting average the next year. In 1983, he crushed a pinch hit grand slam off of Rod Scurry, the first such homer ever for a San Diego Padre. Even if it wasn't fully understood by those around him, Dirty Kurt, through years of brash, aggressive baseball, had been able to earn the appreciation of his teammates and fans nonetheless. Some might take a look at a career like Bevacqua's and remark how lucky he must have been able to stick around for that long. He'll tell you, though, that luck had nothing to do with it. You don't last as long as I have by being lucky.